Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. My name is Allie Wilson, and I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Pisgah Legal. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge that today marks 6 months since Hurricane Helene devastated Western North Carolina, changing lives and rebuilding and reshaping our communities. Over the past 6 months, we have all witnessed the strength and resiliency of our region. And unfortunately, Western North Carolina's resiliency is being tested again by the wildfires that are spreading across areas of our region. Our thoughts are with everyone who is affected. In the midst of everything going on here in Western North Carolina and across the country, we deeply appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. We are so fortunate to have Marielena Hincapié with us, whose expertise will shed light on the national landscape of immigration policy right now, and we're really eager to hear your insights. First, let me share a few housekeeping notes. After Marielena's presentation, she will be in conversation with Pisgah Legal's Executive Director, Jackie Kiger, and following that, we will have audience Q&A. When that time comes, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions. Also, just a note that this session is being recorded. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Marielena Hincapié is a nationally respected leader and legal strategist in the social justice movement. Currently the Distinguished Immigration Scholar at Cornell University, Marielena is a former executive director of the National Immigration Law Center and their Immigrant Justice Fund. She is a key figure in immigration policy, leading transformative initiatives like DACA and the #ImmigrantsAreEssential campaign. An immigrant from Colombia, Marielena brings a bilingual and bicultural perspective to her work, and she has been recognized with numerous awards, and she serves on the board of trustees of the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and the Management Center. She is writing a forthcoming book, Becoming America, a personal history of a nation's immigration wars, that will be published by Flatiron Books in 2027. I'll turn it over to you now, and thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Ali, and thanks in advance to Sensantle for your important translation work as a former interpreter. I especially appreciate the work that you are doing here. And thanks to Jackie, Jacob, Lori, and everyone who has contributed to organizing this important event today. Thanks to the entire staff and board of directors of Pisgah Legal Services for everything you do every day to ensure that low-income individuals have the legal support that they need to meet their basic needs and have the freedom to thrive in Western North Carolina. And thanks to all of you who decided to spend your lunchtime with us today. I truly wish I had been able to be there in person for the Justice Forum last October. But I was really saddened to hear and learn of the devastation that Hurricane Helene had on your lives, your homes, and your communities. I hope that you are finding time to heal as you rebuild. The work of Pisgah Legal Services is personally important to me because I grew up in a low-income family, and I began my legal career with the Legal Aid Society of San Francisco in California. I know personally and professionally how essential legal aid is for leveling the playing field by providing equitable access to justice. Quality legal aid contributes to a more just society, economic stability, and community health and well-being. Pisgah Legal's work is more critical than ever today. Although my father, Arturo Hincapié, only had a second-grade education, and my mother, Maria Teresa Ortiz, only had a fifth-grade education, they understood the importance of education as a pathway out of poverty. My father taught himself how to read so that he could help my older siblings with their homework when we lived in Colombia. And he became an avid reader and instilled in me and my siblings a love for books, which has inspired my forthcoming book called Becoming America, a history of the country's immigration story from the very founding of this nation when this was indigenous people's lands when the first immigrants came on the Mayflower to the present day? And where do we need to go from here as we stand on the eve of the nation's 250th anniversary? Like millions of immigrants throughout history, my parents made the difficult decision to leave their families, their culture, and our beloved homeland of Colombia to give my 9 siblings and me a better life. The same reasons that today migrants and refugees travel across the world. Among my siblings, I count educators, biochemists, physical therapists, and small business owners. And I had the privilege of becoming a lawyer to fight for immigrant justice, worker justice, and to defend our Constitution. We are not takers, invaders, murderers, or animals. We're contributors. We're builders. We are healers. My family, just like yours, is what makes America great. We came from Colombia in the 1970s when the United States was a more welcoming nation. That was made possible because of the civil rights movement, which abolished racial and national origin quotas that had been put in place in the Immigration Act of 1924. The increase in Asian, Irish, Italian, Polish, Russian, and other Eastern European immigration led to the eventual closing of America's doors from 1924 to 1965, almost 4 decades. Led by the eugenics movement, which considered those new immigrants inferior, that discriminatory law resulted from a very similar political climate to that we're experiencing today. The narrative is almost exactly the same. Today, my parents would not recognize this United States. If my family were trying to migrate today from Colombia, we would not be considered worthy of being here. Some of my family members might even be targeted for deportation because, as we are seeing, this is not about being documented or undocumented. The current administration is even taking legal status away from people. We are at a crossroads in history, one that demands our vigilance and action. We are witnessing a remaking of America through immigration and anti-immigrant laws, narratives, and culture wars that allow them to create a white minority rule. This is about race, class, gender, and political power. This is why we've heard false allegations about non-citizens voting, which provides this administration the excuse to move forward with the voting registration requirements that President Trump just announced this week, unlawfully overriding the authority of states to care for election integrity. By requiring proof of citizenship to vote, that's not going to affect undocumented immigrants who are not trying to vote. They're afraid to even go out to buy groceries. Instead, these changes, if allowed to go into effect, will impact citizens and will disenfranchise U.S. voters, particularly in rural communities and seniors who may not have access to their birth certificates or cannot afford a passport. It is not a surprise that this administration started with a frontal attack on so-called DEI. They are not only trying to roll back our progress since the civil rights movement, they're putting policies, practices, and people in place to replace our ideals of recognizing the strength of our diversity, equity for all of us, and the importance of inclusion and belonging in building a healthy society. In their version, DEI stands for this. The D stands for division, as they pit working class people against each other. It stands for disinformation to undermine our democracy. It stands for deportations and disappearances, as people go deep into hiding out of fear, and others are being physically removed from their communities, sent to faraway prisons, and separated from their loved ones, including their U.S. citizen spouses. There are 1.2 million U.S. citizens in the United States whose spouses are undocumented and who fear every single day that they will be separated. Their E in their DEI stands for exploitation, exploitation of people's pain, their economic anxieties, and their fears for their children's future. Rather than addressing those needs, the real needs that people have, it's easier to point the finger at immigrants and demonize them by calling us immigrants and criminals. Their E stands for exclusion, where entire sections of our society will be blocked from having their basic needs met. Food, housing, healthcare, and if they have their way, Medicare and retirement benefits. It stands for evasion, including evading the truth, tax evasion, and all the other ethical and constitutional laws that they're violating because they believe that they are above the law. Their I stands for intrusion on our privacy rights and their efforts of controlling our bodies and our gender identities. It stands for making us invisible, particularly immigrants, LGBTQ+, women, workers, and others that they are targeting. Their I stands for intimidation, like the threat to withhold much needed disaster relief funding from Buncombe County simply because your local leaders in Asheville, including Sheriff Miller, understand the importance of creating a safe community for everyone so that a victim or a witness of a crime comes forward voluntarily and contacts the police. That is what makes Asheville a model of community safety. We cannot allow ourselves to be intimidated, paralyzed by their shock and awe approach and fear mongering. We must do what we're doing today, come together in community to fight for all of us. I will be honest and share that there are moments when I am afraid. I am scared because I do believe that things will get worse. There will be more pain. We will lose more people. People will die when they don't have access to food banks and health care. Women are scared to go for their prenatal appointments, and parents are too afraid to take their children to school or an emergency room with an asthma attack. Parents are planning to figure out who is authorized to pick up their children at school if they're detained. And they're also not registering their children for the next academic year. That is just months away. People are even afraid of filing their taxes this year, especially given the latest request by DHS to access the IRS records of over 700,000 people who have been complying with federal law by filing their taxes with an individual taxpayer ID number or ITIN. This is a number that was created by the federal government in 1996. I mean, just think about the hypocrisy in our laws. The federal immigration laws say, if you are undocumented, you do not have a right to work here. But if you are working here and you have income, here is this ITIN that you must pay taxes with. And that number, people are law abiding and have been coming out voluntarily for years now, since 1996, to file their taxes. 1 in 6 US citizen children that lives in poverty has a parent with an ITIN. These families are essential members of our communities. They are working, paying taxes, and raising not only their US citizen children, but often raising our children as well and taking care of our loved ones who are sick. This latest development will undoubtedly impact Pisgah Legal Services low-income taxpayer clinic and our economy. This threatens individual taxpayers' privacy and the stability of entire households and communities where long-residing families and businesses thrive. In addition to being cruel, it just makes no economic sense. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy estimates that in 2022, undocumented immigrants paid over 96.7 billion with a B, $96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. The majority of that, almost 60 billion, went to the federal government, while the remaining $37 billion was paid to state and local governments like North Carolina and Asheville. Their study revealed that 40 states, including North Carolina, collected higher tax rates relative to income from undocumented immigrants than from the top 1% of households living within your state. Just pause and think about that, right? Here are the very people that this administration is now trying to access their private information from their tax records that then puts them at risk for detention and deportation solely because they have been complying with the law and paying their taxes while the top 1% is not paying their fair share. That impacts all of us. However, this administration does not seem to care about common sense policies or the rule of law, and it cares even less about people's humanity and decency. This is a dire moment. It can be numbing, especially if you're watching the news or scrolling on your phone on social media. Some of you may feel like you don't know where to turn to. Others might wish it would all disappear and hope that this is just a bad nightmare. I want to acknowledge that in Western North Carolina, you have just been through a traumatic experience as a community. And many people are still experiencing the long-term effects and the collective trauma from COVID-19, which started just 5 years ago. So when you take that over the last 5 years, plus the last 6 months that you have been struggling through the rebuilding of your communities, often with the support of migrant workers who have come to help you rebuild, that layered on top of the current extremist political climate and the uncertain times in which we are in now, it is overwhelming. I just want to acknowledge that. The exhaustion is real, but so is your strength and your resilience. It's common to hear that we're living in unprecedented times. You hear that a lot these days. But the fact is that our ancestors, both in this country and across the world, have experienced similar and even worse situations. We inherited their lessons, their stories, and their courage. The work ahead is difficult, but we're not alone. This is what I call the Project of Us, a time for us to come together and fight with each other and for each other. We need strong, resilient institutions like Pisgah Legal Services that defend access to justice and the rule of law for everyone. We must unite to shape a just, equitable, inclusive, multiracial democracy. But here's the catch. To build a just and equitable, multiracial society for all, we must be fully inclusive. All means all. It means even including the people who hate us. For me, that means reaching out to people who believe that I should not exist, that my family is not worthy of being here, that we are not worthy of being American. As Dr. King reminded us, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I know this sounds hard, but I believe that we are the ones that this world have been waiting for. And I would encourage all of us to reach out to the people in our lives who may not have voted or who may have voted differently than us for whatever reason, and to approach them with a spirit of generosity and curiosity and not judgment. We must learn to have courageous conversations with our family members, our neighbors, co-workers, and other community members from a place of love and light, from a place of growing our beloved community. We can shift the course of history, but it will require all of us to rise. We have gotten this far because many leaders throughout history have transformed their fear into power so that we could be here today. They decided to rise and face the challenges of their day. We must do the same today. We need moral imagination, collective courage, and action. There's no better time than spring to plant the seeds for a shared future in which we all belong. We can turn the tide if we each make a personal commitment. You can start by recommitting to Pisgah Legal Services and its clients through donations, volunteering, and engagement in the community. If there were ever a moment to build community, it is now. We need a community of supporters to sustain Pisgah Legal Services work and hopefully increase its capacity for immediate and long-term needs. I trust that you will agree with me that the amazing 3 attorneys on their immigration team are doing incredible work, but that is not enough to meet the need of this time. Every organization will look completely different a year or 3 years from now, just because of the nature of our world, the funding streams, and the changing needs. Change is the only constant we have in our life, and we're living in a period of accelerated changes. It's impossible to know what the legal services needs will be, but what is clear is that Pisgah Legal will be needed. People will need help understanding the rapidly changing federal and state laws, accessing legal representation, and other needs that we cannot even imagine at this time. Just think, 7 months ago, none of you even knew that what your needs were going to be in the aftermath of a hurricane. So we have to be prepared for anything and everything. History teaches us that change happens because of those who refuse to give up. This project, called the United States of America, is still young. I sometimes think maybe these are the teenage years, and that is why we're experiencing this turmoil. The project of the United States of America promises democracy, equality, and one nation under law, a promise that's often broken and unkept. But it is up to us to build on that promise together as part of the project of us, a country, a society, a world that is built by us, for us, and worthy of us. Gracias.
Thank you, Marielena. Your remarks, your call to action, and your vision for how we can strengthen the movement for justice are exactly what we in this community here in Western North Carolina needed to hear right now and today. And so I know that we're in this webinar space, but I'm speaking for everyone right now when I say how grateful we are for you, for your courageous truth-telling, and for your willingness to be in deep conversation with us today at this particular moment in time.
Thank you, Jackie.
So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes and kind of provide an overview of Pisgah Legal Services work and specifically what we do to support immigrants right now in Western North Carolina, and to talk about some of what we're seeing and those changes that you mentioned. We have our program. It's called our Justice for All program, which is immigration law services, but also all of our holistic legal services and anti-poverty work, as you mentioned, really do support low-income people, including immigrants and their families across this entire region here in Western North Carolina. For 47 years, Pisgah has served low-income people here in Western North Carolina, and we help them meet their basic needs with areas and issues such as housing, access to quality and affordable health care, protection from abuse and violence, and securing essential income. Pisgah Legal launched the Justice for All program in 2002, more than 23 years ago, to provide free legal assistance to low-income immigrants in our region through immigration law specifically. This work started out to help immigrants and their families obtain lawful status and work authorization, which leads to improving safety, security, income, and of course, overall well-being that really achieves our mission. Our immigration legal services team is small but dedicated. We have a fully bilingual team made up of, you mentioned, 3 attorneys, a Department of Justice fully accredited representative who also handles cases, and 2 legal assistants and screeners. And as we've had to expand our reach, we rely heavily on pro bono attorneys and volunteers who assist us with legal documentation and client meetings. And I know, though I can't see them, that many are on this webinar here today listening in. And I just want to take a moment to thank them and our staff for all that you do. And we've also continued to expand our work. We assist families, immigrant families, with filing taxes, as you mentioned, securing basic income. Last year alone, more than 30% of our tax filings were from immigrant households. And you've noted that impact on our tax services in the future. But this is powerful work, and we see a big need for it. And that's not the only need that has emerged over time here in Western North Carolina. The need continues to grow, and it's immense. Our region has only a handful of immigration attorneys to serve thousands of people in 18 counties. And here at Pisgah, 3 attorneys for 18 counties. I mean, it's simply not enough. Unfortunately, North Carolina ranks last in the country for legal representation in immigration court. So we're starting at the very bottom there. And as we know, and we'll talk about further, the immigration system is complex. It's difficult to navigate at any point in time, but it is especially difficult to navigate when you're facing barriers, language access, economic hardship, and now an increased fear of deportation and separation from your family. And then beyond legal status, the challenges that many of our immigrant families face here is significant. Many are working in low-paying industries where they have fewer workplace protections and less job mobility. Families are often struggling with economic instability, and it puts children at a higher risk of growing up in poverty. And here at Pisgah, we are driven to reduce the burdens of poverty, to break the cycle of poverty. And helping children who are living in poverty is another part that's essential to our mission. Now at Pisgah Legal, we prioritize serving the most vulnerable members of the immigrant community. This includes survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, child abuse, and neglect. And in other cases, we assist those who are seeking protection from persecution in their home countries. In addition to legal services work, we provide community education, and we unfortunately are doing much more in the area of emergency preparedness support. We work with our community partners and grassroots organizations to do Know Your Rights sessions and make sure that we are informing immigrants of their constitutional rights and helping to prepare those critical documents like powers of attorney to ensure the care of their children in case they are detained or in fact deported. So, your words and what you spoke about today, our work is so deeply connected to what you've said and to immigration policy. And under any administration, we would pay attention to shifts in immigrant policy, and we certainly pay attention when it means that more people experiencing poverty are suffering. And we need to talk more about, how these shifts are going to affect our work and our clients. And so we are really honored to have you here with us today to talk about that broader landscape, what it means for our community, and importantly, for all of us who are here, what Pisgah Legal and others can do to continue to stand for justice and to fight for our clients' rights. So with that, I'd love to dive into some questions and just have some conversation with you.
Great.
So, you've touched on this as you were speaking, but I would like to really dig into your perspective on what you see as the critical role of legal services programs like Pisgah Legal, where our services are free. We don't have limitations on who we can serve in terms of supporting immigrants. But then I want to tie that into, the fact that just last weekend, there was a presidential memo that came out that really started to threaten the work of immigration law attorneys specifically, and what that means for our services and, the nation.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. And I do want to take a moment because I highlighted the 3 attorneys. And as an attorney who believes very much in the importance of non-lawyers, I want to thank the accredited rep, the organizers, all of the advocates who are part of your immigration team. This is a really hard time to be engaging in immigrant rights work. And as you said, and as we've been talking about, it's not just the challenges that immigrant families themselves are experiencing, but now it's the challenge that we as immigrant advocates and lawyers in particular, as we'll talk about in a moment, are now at risk as well. So, the first thing I would say, as I mentioned in my speech, is that the role of lawyers in legal aid is essential, right? It's essential in terms of representing the most vulnerable members of our community. As you noted, Pisgah Legal Services is one of the few legal aids in the country, and especially in North Carolina, that represents undocumented immigrants that can provide that access to legal services. Many people in the audience may not know that legal services restrictions were put back in 1986 under President Reagan, prohibiting most legal aids in the country if they receive funding from LSC to represent undocumented immigrants and a bunch of other restrictions. And so, again, thank you for the work that you and your team have been doing for so many years. Public interest lawyers in general, I would say, are critical because they're ensuring that everybody, not just immigrants, right, but all vulnerable communities are able to defend their civil rights and their civil liberties. And that is important because they're doing so, you are doing so, regardless of where people were born, what color their skin is, how much money they have, what language they speak. And our country is founded on a system that trusts and has trusted for the last 250 years that there's a check and balance, that the executive, legislative, and judicial branches work in harmony and are providing that check and that balance to ensure that we have a democracy that attempts to be fair to everyone. And that's where legal aid and lawyers come in, ensuring that when those violations happen, because clearly we have a history where that has happened, but at this moment, we're experiencing a congressional branch, a legislative branch that seems to have reneged on their constitutional authority and responsibilities to hold the executive in check. And the big question is what happens with the legal profession and the judiciary. And we're already seeing where the current administration is already flouting and refusing to follow district court orders. And so it's very, very troubling and dangerous that we've entered into this terrain that takes us closer and closer to the cliff of living in an autocratic society and where our democracy may not survive. And our democracy depends on us, on the legal profession, on everyone that's part of the legal profession. So the individual lawyers, legal aid, other nonprofit organizations, law firms, pro bono attorneys, and obviously judges and the court system as a whole. I mean, that is truly the only thing that the nation has left to prevent authoritarian overreach, that and people power. And so the fact that this past Saturday, that executive order was issued, I will admit, Jackie, my heart dropped because I was like, okay, all right, like now I am, and I will admit, and I think I mentioned to you in our prep call, I am already starting to become very aware and afraid of what I'm saying publicly, both as a naturalized citizen and now as a lawyer. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to chill us from exercising our rights. And so obviously I'm not holding back, but I'm sitting with that fear and that uncertainty and preparing. I have a safety plan, just like undocumented immigrants have. I think it's important for lawyers and legal aids, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, to make sure that you as an organization, that your team members are also preparing and are also safe while continuing to make sure that we're doing our our job as lawyers, which is to uphold the Constitution and ensure that everyone in our community has access to justice.
Wow, it's just hitting me, what the reality of what you're saying. I too have been grappling with what does this mean, and how do we continue the work, and also know that we're doing important ethical work, right? And that this is upholding the law and standing up for the rights of our clients and our community. And yet it is, we keep saying this, but unprecedented in terms of what we're experiencing, and just having, knowing what to do next. So thank you for so thoughtfully thinking through that, and again, sort of sharing where you're at, both professionally and personally, with us. We really appreciate that. Now, that one of the things that we are, one of the areas that we have pretty greatly expanded just since December is, looking at emergency preparedness clinics, and that kind of term encompassing, helping people to get powers of attorney and other documentation put together so that they can be prepared if, unfortunately, kind of the worst case scenario happens. And then the Know Your Rights presentations, which are broader. We're getting a lot of requests from community partners and, just the community at large, and individuals who want to understand, there are basic rights that you have under the Constitution. And we're hearing, from a national perspective too, like that work is really effective. So I think if you could perhaps talk about, that work broadly, why that is the work of right now. And then if you're able to forecast the phases of change that we might see as our response evolves. We know we don't exactly know what is going to happen next, but we're really trying to be thoughtful as we prepare.
Yep. Yes, Jackie. So the work that you're already starting, those clinics, the Know Your Rights training, they are the most important work that could be happening right now. And that's for a couple of reasons, right? One is knowledge is power, right? People need to know their rights in order to exercise them. So like just full stop, that is, among the most important work that you can be doing. And then these clinics, to ensure that people can prepare for that horrible nightmare that people that like this recording that parents are playing and replaying in their head about what happens, right? If they are detained and can't pick up their child, right? Or what happens to that worker who gets detained and needs that final paycheck? Someone needs to access that. Or what about, a family that's being deported and they have money in the bank, right? Like they should have access to that and have somebody who can provide that. So the work that you are doing really truly is the lifeline for your clients and their family members and community to make sure that they are best prepared if the worst case scenario happens. I would also say, if you haven't started this, that you need to also prepare for the inevitable family separation. What happens when you do get the call from school or from child welfare services that there is a family of 2 or 5 children who no longer have parents and are suddenly without a caregiver because they didn't know about your services and didn't have a safety plan in place, perhaps, or they didn't think it was going to happen to them because one of the comments that I've heard time and time again from immigrants since the election in November was, oh, this is not going to happen to me. Trump is saying they're going to go after criminals. And we're now seeing that since the inauguration, half of the people that have been detained, half of them had no criminal record whatsoever. And so no one is safe. And that family separation will absolutely be happening. So preparing for that. And I would say that's not just your immigration team, that's probably your family law team, your housing, right? It cuts across the agency as a whole. The other place is workplace raids. Look, it's very clear that this administration came in with a goal of conducting massive raids, right? They are talking about mass deportations, the biggest and greatest and whatever other adjectives the president uses. They can't do that with existing resources, which is why they're targeting local agencies and particularly trying to get law enforcement to do their job. The way to get larger numbers is to detain people at workplaces, right? Large numbers of people, workplaces in large apartment buildings. And we're starting to see that. And so the know your rights that you're doing, the business community needs to know their rights as well. I've been very heartened to hear from employers across the country who are actually also getting know your rights trainings and have been able to block ICE from coming onto their property, because at the end of the day, a work site, like a house or home or an apartment, whether you own it or not, those are all private properties. And we all have constitutional rights to prevent that entry from law enforcement, including federal immigration agents, without a judicial warrant. And so the business community also is starting to and needs to be prepared. I mean, the last thing that I'll say about this, Jackie, and happy to dive in a little bit more, is given this recent executive order that we were just talking about, like every other nonprofit, Pisgah Legal Services also needs to be doing its own risk management and making sure that as an agency, you are also coordinating with other nonprofit organizations to get legal counsel, to make sure that all of you together makes that more efficient to prepare. It's not far-fetched to imagine that your agency might be targeted or subpoenaed or otherwise find itself in the crossfire. I think about my mother always used to say, es mejor prevenir que lamentar, right? It's better to prevent than lament, and to be prepared. And that has always been a personal motto of mine in my career. And that's why I do so much scenario planning and think about all the possibilities. It's better to be prepared, right? We don't know, but a lot of challenges are ahead.
That is certainly true, and something that I have been thinking about, but how how I had never thought that, 6 months into this role as executive director, or a little over 6 months, and would be thinking about, this type of preparedness as well. But what you've said, it makes a lot of sense, and it, I think, will help us consider what our work could look like, in the next 6 months and in the next year. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
You mentioned other kind of groups and where they fit into things. And so I did want to say that, here in Western North Carolina, we're really lucky to have a lot of different groups who are involved in this issue. In addition to our work, we work with grassroots organizations, churches, faith groups, lots of advocacy groups, both local and across the state, even national. And there are so many different roles and ranges of strengths and perspectives that everyone brings. Could you talk to us a little bit more about, what you've seen work well when different groups come together to be effective?
Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear, Jackie. And I'm not surprised because I hear such amazing things. I will make it to Asheville one day in person, but I mean, look, I've spent most of my career in coalition work. I truly believe in the importance of bridge building and the power of organizing. And so I just want to say a thank you to everyone who's here from other organizations, from the faith community, advocacy, organizing, communications, the art community, right? This is a moment that everyone has to come together. There's no one strategy, no one organization is going to help us get out of this situation that we're in right now. And so, yes, absolutely. I would even recommend that part of what needs to happen first and foremost is really just to find time to come together socially, to build and strengthen relationships, right? Like COVID, this is an important time to be checking up on each other, right? Just as human beings, not necessarily with a work plan, but also just everyone is struggling just the way we were during the COVID years. And so we have some experience, right? Some muscle memory from what those first months were under COVID. And you, of course, have that from the trauma of the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Helene and the community building that you've been doing. So I would say build on that. I remember a story I read during COVID early on from Italy, where part of the safety plan there, they talked about it. They had like a logo that said a text is like a hug. And so it's like, text someone, just let them know you're thinking of them. Don't necessarily expect a hug, but this again, this is such a hard moment that we're in. We need each other. And so that coalition work is essential, I would say. And that work doesn't get funded oftentimes, right? And so raising money together to hire somebody from the community, from the group as a coordinator who can help support the work across the coalition, who can help organize, schedule meetings, buy food for your meetings, whatever you need. The other thing is, this is not a time for competition or duplicating efforts. There is too much work to do. So come together, really figure out how to divide up the work that needs to happen. Consider mergers, right? We're hearing about a lot of that throughout the country, where smaller nonprofits are not going to be able to survive if they continue by themselves. One of the things we haven't talked about is the funding streams for organizations that relied on any federal government funding. That is likely coming to a screeching halt, and foundations themselves are also being targeted. And so many of them are also concerned about providing funding, or especially not providing funding to any new grantees. And so really thinking creatively about, how do we tap private sector money? How do we tap individuals in the community to provide resources, and using that collectively? I'm a true believer and have successfully engaged in collective fundraising for campaigns, for coalitions throughout the years, and think it's a good way to do that. And then lastly, I would say is self-care is really important. Pass the baton. It is absolutely okay for staff at an organization to not be available for a particular meeting or training, a Know Your Rights training, and to ask a different organization to take it on, or even within organizations themselves.
Really well said. And thank you for noting the power of relationships and what that will look like, the building and the connecting of those relationships, because we have a lot of work to do together. And I think supporting one another, as you've noted, is a big piece of that. So I appreciate that. I think we are ready to move into some questions from our audience members who are joining us on the webinar today. So I'm going to invite Ali to start us off with some of the questions that have come in.
Wonderful. Thank you both. That was just great. I was writing so many notes during your talk. I really appreciate the lots to dive into. And we do have some audience questions already. And I encourage other audience members to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you do have a question for either Marielena or Jackie or both. So let's start off. There are several social service providers on this call who support immigrant communities with both private and public comments. What advice do you have for service providers who engage with immigrants who question whether receiving these services will affect their pending immigration cases? And can you speak to public charge concerns?
Yes. Let me start with the latter, because it's something that I've spent many years on. So public charges, for people in the audience who may not know that, the public charge rule actually comes from the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. So it has been on our books for several centuries, and it started very much as part of the racial exclusion of Chinese immigrants in our country. And then it has stayed on our books since then, and basically says that if individuals who are coming to the United States may become, or do not have the income, either have illnesses or have other needs that they will require some kind of public assistance, if they are considered a public charge, they would then be excluded from coming into the country. That, for the most part, actually was not really implemented even in the early 1900s, when people were coming from Ellis Island. Some people, like the discretion and the authority that individual agents had at that time, some people came in, some people did not. And it's something that I talk a lot about in my book. But in the first Trump administration was the first time that we saw an effort to radically expand public charge for anyone who required or received health, nutrition, or housing assistance. And they would be blocked from becoming permanent residents, even if they were lawfully eligible for those resources. And I immediately saw that that had nothing to do with immigrants. Again, that was a chilling effect. They were trying to instill fear in immigrant communities. And second, by blocking people from being able to become permanent residents, what they were actually trying to do was blocking those immigrants, mostly Black and brown immigrants, recent arrivals, from becoming for future US citizens and future voters. That is the blueprint, right? The blueprint to a white minority rule. The changing demographics in the country are showing many more Black and brown and Asian people coming. And so let's keep them from becoming future voters, right? So that's just, again, in the scheme of understanding all of these things are interconnected. When I was at the National Immigration Law Center, it was an issue that we had worked on for many decades. We immediately created one of those coalitions that I was just talking with you about, Jackie, the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign, which is specifically bringing together immigrant rights, anti-poverty, children's educators, really the broad range of folks to work on that and get information to educate communities and families about what the rule that was being considered at the time was and what it wasn't, the chilling effect and the humanitarian impact that created immediately was heartbreaking and horrendous. And the courts eventually blocked the administration from moving forward with that. And one of our top priorities from the National Immigration Law Center to President Biden when he was voted and inaugurated was to address the public charge, which he repealed. We do expect that this administration will once again attempt to bring that back. And so many of you probably have a lot of experience with this. If you're not familiar with protectingimmigrantfamilies.org, please go on. They have a ton of resources. It grew so much that it became larger than milk. And so it's fiscally sponsored by the National Immigration Law Center still, but it's an incredible resource and a great place for that coalition. And then there are state tables. I'm assuming there's a North Carolina table. And if not, then you all on this call should organize it. Ali, remind me, there was a first part to that question that I forgot.
Yeah, so I think, what advice do you have for service providers who engage with immigrants who question whether receiving these services will affect their pending immigration case?
Got it. Yep. So that is, now I understand the connection to the public charge. So yeah, right now, there is no public charge rule. And unless the Trump administration brings that back or issues some other order that says that immigrants are not eligible for legal services or food banks or other types of things, as of right now, people are still eligible. And this is, again, where we want to be careful. This is where education becomes so important, right? It's that knowledge is power and making sure that clients and families and communities are empowered to not cede their rights. Do not give up our rights. Do not give up our power by not accessing the very services that people need to thrive and to survive. And so I think for the service providers, stay informed, right? Making sure that because things are rapidly changing, that you are getting legally accurate and timely information and can then properly inform your clients about that as well.
I'll just add quickly, we can be a resource as well for some of those changing issues. We followed the public charge rule and the implications very closely the last time, advocated against it, and understand the chilling effect it has on people in our community. So we're certainly a resource, and Protecting Immigrant Families we are a part of that. They had a call today at 12 right before this webinar. So we're linked in with some of those other resources too. But yes, we are certainly a resource, and we'll do more. If or when laws change, we'll be a point of education here at Pisgah.
And that's, again, another example of the importance of legal services and the role of lawyers, right? To help make sense of proposed rules or laws versus what is actual law.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this next question, Jackie, I think you can start off with, please. It's what government grants have disappeared that support Pisgah Legal and other similar essential organizations across North Carolina and the U.S., and what kind of financial gap has that created?
So yes, thank you for that question. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot that we feel fairly uncertain about as well. Right now, what I can tell you is that for Pisgah, around 25% of our overall budget is related to federal grants that either come directly from the federal government or subcontracts or kind of our state-federal partnership. We have learned already that the grant that funds part of our Affordable Care Act navigator work will be cut by 90% beginning in August. And so we experienced that during a prior administration, and we're experiencing it again, which is unfortunate. We also were, and Marielena, you mentioned this a little bit, but we were in conversations to be a sub-grantee of a very large grant across multiple states through a national partner, helping unaccompanied minors through special immigrant juvenile status. This is a very vulnerable young population with many legal rights. That work was going to be a 5-year grant. It was in the middle of, we were finalizing everything, and it was completely canceled. That was significant funding that would have helped us add capacity potentially to the team, but also do work that we see each and every day that we can't even now do enough of, and the need will only grow. Many of our partner organizations are also fearing the loss of funding. I mean, across many different departments, there's a loss of funding. There's, the question of, there's funding opportunities that people were relying on to apply for that have simply disappeared from websites, including the opportunities under the Violence Against Women Act. So there's funding that is being cut from our local food banks and food pantries. So it is for the nonprofit community, both locally and nationally, there's a lot of hard questions and uncertainty. And for Pisgah, what we're able to do and the demand for our services, knowing that we're likely to lose money in the future, it presents a very difficult challenge right now, and one that we want to rise to the occasion and meet, because more people need us now than ever before.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions that are similar vein, so I'm going to combine them.
Okay.
What is Pisgah Legal Services doing? What should we all be doing to ensure that state and local elected representatives understand the challenges facing our immigrant neighbors and help provide the support they need? And does reaching out to these government representatives help, or do we worry about drawing more attention to Pisgah Legal and other organizations that are serving this community?
So maybe I'll start, and then Marielena, I'd love for you to jump in on some of the broader pieces. I mean, what we're doing right now is, we're focusing on our mission and serving the immediate urgent needs of our clients. Our team, our immigration team, as well as the rest of Pisgah Legal, we're seeing an increase in questions related to this. So community engagement and outreach, tax issues, all of the immigration clients that we currently serve, as well as our perspective, the people who need our services. We're trying to respond to those needs, to get out in community and do the Know Your Rights sessions. And then, of course, help as many people prepare, as we spoke about with that emergency preparedness. We are looking at, how to raise funding to keep this work going and add capacity. We are analyzing, frankly, what we should be doing in terms of educating or reaching out to lawmakers and other groups, because that the part of the question that is mentioned, does it draw attention? We want to make sure that our clients feel safe accessing our services. That is a key priority in how we are doing this work moving forward. And it is something that we have to look at almost day to day in some ways, but know that this is our mission, this is our work, and we're working through how to do that best for our clients and our community.
Yes, I mean, I think what I hear in the question, or the questions, Allie, because I think you combined some, is a fundamental fear as a result of the strategy that this administration is using, which is basically to chill all of us from knowing that we are on the right side of history and that we're on the right side of justice and the law. And yet we're afraid that if we speak out, speak up, raise these concerns to our members of Congress or elected state or local elected officials who work for us, right? Let's remember, right? We elect them, our taxpayer money pays for them, their salaries. if we give in to that, it's normal to feel the fear, right? So I want to acknowledge it. But if we give in to that fear, we are allowing the country to more rapidly go over the cliff into an authoritarian regime. And so part of what we need to do is be smart, work together to identify who are the people, right? Senator Tillis needs to hear from you. Your members of Congress need to hear from you. And there are ways to do so without, not exposing individuals, right? Like individual clients, names of families or anything like that, but to talk about what this means, right? Again, I mean, just some of the issues we've been talking about today, the importance of legal aid agencies to be able to represent the most vulnerable in our communities, including immigrants who are paying taxes, right? Who are working, who are raising US citizen children, who are paying sales taxes, whose taxes are also supporting those salaries, who are, in so many ways, right, aspiring citizens. They are aspiring Americans. And the majority of undocumented immigrants in this country have been here for over 10 years. The majority of the average age of somebody who, average number of years of someone who is married to a US citizen is 23 years. So these are long-term residents of our communities, right? They're the people who are helping you rebuild after the hurricane. And so if you reach out, and I would really, really hope that you do reach out to your members of Congress and to your elected officials, as long as you're speaking from that place of value and principles and ideas and what's best for all of your communities, I think you are safe. And I would, again, really encourage you to do so and to work with each other when you have those moments of fear so that you can just break through that fear and speak truth to power.
What do you hear about the forthcoming country ban, particularly of immigrants from Muslim countries? And can you speak to implications of this for reunification efforts, religious divisions in this country, voter demographics, etc.?
Yes. So unfortunately, I think we should all be preparing for that to happen. During the first Trump administration, it was the first thing he did that Friday of the end of the first week of after his inauguration. When I was at the National Immigration Law Center, we sued within 24 hours along with the ACLU and Yale. And were successful up to a certain point. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court allowed most of that ban, the Muslim ban, to go into effect. And then we had separate lawsuits that were working on trying to reunify families that had been wrongfully been separated. I think they're just going to take that to the next level now. And unfortunately, with this Supreme Court, I'm not sure that will be that will be blocked. And so look, the current situation that we're in is that we have an administration that from its campaigning has been very clear about having this become a white Christian nation at the exclusion of Muslims and other faiths. And it's particularly ironic because this country, when the first immigrants came from the Mayflower, right, and came on indigenous people's lands, half of them came in search of the freedom of worshiping and freedom of religion. And so that is what this country is based on, about that freedom, right? Those freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of press, that is also under attack. And yet they have been very clear about their agenda. And so I do think that Muslim communities in particular will continue to be targeted, that we will see once again an increase in hate crimes against other faiths. We've seen the growth in anti-Semitism as well. And, what's hard about this moment is that authoritarian regimes and this notion of the great replacement theory all comes from the same place of eugenics movement from the early 1900s, which was they considered almost all of us inferior, including Jewish people. And so this is a time for all faith communities to come together. And I particularly feel that because of the risks are On the majority of us, again, this is when we have to come together across faiths, across race, ethnicity, across professions, across the country, both nationally and locally.
Thank you. And the next question addresses a topic that you brought up in your remarks, but I think we could dig a little deeper. What is the current status of the IRS's decision to share taxpayer information with ICE? And does the reversal of a longstanding IRS policy to not share taxpayer information violate any written confidentiality requirements? And have there been any court challenges that have been filed?
Yes, thank you for the question. So again, right, they're starting with immigrants and immigration, but just be mindful that everything that they are doing about immigrants and immigration actually will impact everyone. If they are allowed to get away with violating, absolutely, it would be a violation of the privacy rights that are a tenet to our IRS code. I mean, look, the United States government and state and local governments depend on taxpayer money to function. Right? The government does not function without those resources. And um, part of that confidentiality, that firewall that exists, not only between the IRS and immigration, but IRS and any law enforcement agency, is because the government has been very clear. Our tax system is based on if you make any money in the United States, that is taxable, even if it's illegally earned money through, like if you're in a place where gambling is not allowed or sex traffic. I mean, like whatever it is, even Al Capone, right, back then during Prohibition, right, all of that was taxed. And so again, it's that confidentiality, that those privacy rules. This would be a radical shift of our tax system. And so that should send chills through every taxpayer in the United States. But back to specifically this effort to share information. So yes, lawsuit was filed out of the Chicago area, and a hearing was held this week. The federal government, as it's doing in most of its cases, is lying. I don't know how else to say it except to call it as it is. They claim that they are not sharing information more broadly, and that they would only go to the Department of Homeland Security would only go to the IRS if they already have a case of someone who is in their custody, that's undocumented, etc. There's no reason to trust that, to be completely honest with you. I think the litigation will continue. It has not been blocked, unfortunately. And so that's a place where I think Pisgah Legal and with support from national organizations can make sure that all of you are well informed about what happens with that litigation, whether or not the courts allow the Department of Homeland Security to coordinate that. Now, that's separate and apart from what is in place, which is the Department of Homeland Security has also asked for IRS has a unit that's a law enforcement unit within the IRS where they have law enforcement powers. DHS has asked for the authority to deputize them to also enforce immigration law so that together they can detain and prosecute undocumented immigrants.
Thank you. So this will be our last question from the audience, and I'm actually going to combine several and throw it to Jackie to first answer this. But first, what is the most important role for volunteer lawyers right now? And also, what volunteer opportunities are available with us at Pisgah Legal for people who are not attorneys and who don't have a legal background? So it's a two-parter.
Okay, so I would say, most important right now in our immigration work for volunteer attorneys is attorneys who are willing to do one-on-one sessions with immigrant families to kind of walk through all of their rights, kind of a one-on-one know your rights, and then some of that preparedness and understanding, and then to even go further into some of the things that we're talking about, which, we talked about the public charge rule, but, working with families to understand the rights that they are able to access at this time and to sort through sort of what is out there that sounds scary and is chilling, but also what is the law as it stands right now. That one-on-one client work is going to become more and more important over time. And that is something that we certainly, we want to be able to meet this growing need and could use your help to do that. In terms of volunteer attorneys, volunteer work broadly, we need volunteers in so many different capacities to spread information out, to help us, to take materials out into the community, to be ambassadors for Pisgah in a lot of ways, to connect people who may not know about us and our services and what we offer, and that we are a safe place for people to access services. That's really important. There are event specific tasks, there are office related tasks. I mean, I would just encourage you that we certainly have many opportunities, and we'd love for you to apply so that we can figure out sort of what skills you have and how we can build that into our responsiveness to the community now and in the future.
Great. And Allie, if I can just add, one is volunteers. You are so important. For anyone who already volunteers, thank you. Those of you considering it, please do so. One, it's just so personally meaningful and enriching. Second, I think one of the other places is, so there's the train the trainer model, right? Like getting as many people out there to help do these trainings. The second piece is a little bit of what I was talking about earlier, which is you are all ambassadors and can help build community together, right? One of the most important things that's happening right now that has led to the moment that we're in is disinformation and misinformation. So being informed about who immigrant communities are, who Pisgah Legal Aid's client services, a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, so that you can have one-on-ones with your neighbors. You can have one-on-ones at the local grocery store, at the local restaurant, cafe, wherever you are, to help change the understanding of if people are only receiving one-sided and misinformation, they need to hear, right, what's truly happening and the impact of these laws. Again, there's just such a need for greater communication, and that one-on-one piece both uh, achieves two things. One, it helps build community, and second, it helps break down through that misinformation and get accurate and timely information out there. I'm sorry, I'm going to share one more thing, which is I think the other thing that's needed in this country, and maybe you all can start it locally, is share your own immigrant story, your own immigrant history. We are forgetting in this country, right? There's a conversation that is so toxic about today's immigration. But if you all were able to share, like, hey, this is what I know about when my family came and this is the reason they came, or talk to your family members and find out that, have a conversation about that to help really position what's happening today in the greater historical context. And there's a great opportunity to do that because next year is the 250th anniversary. But again, sharing your storytelling is such a powerful tool to help change the narrative and culture. We can't fight the narrative and culture war that this administration has waged on us only through law and policy strategies.
So much that you have shared with us today that I think is giving us ideas, momentum, inspiration. I know, a lot of us came into this conversation today feeling frustrated, scared, uncertain. I mean, so many emotions, right? Both from a collective community perspective as well as the individual perspective. And so I want to really just pause to say that it's been very powerful to hear your words. And I wonder if you will leave us with a little bit more about what is keeping you hopeful at this particular moment as we kind of look forward.
Yeah, so the first thing I do is I stay off of social media and I strategically limit my news intake. Really, there's just way too much. So that's the first thing. It's like a self-care piece, and I meditate and practice yoga. But I spend time in nature, right? Which is always a great reminder of the resilience of our planet, which has gone through so many horrors, as you know, from the hurricane as well. And these days, I'm spending a lot of time learning about history as part of my research for my book. And there are so many examples of courageous acts of kindness, of valor, of strength, that it helps keep me grounded, and it just helps remind me that this too shall pass. We will get through this. And we have an opportunity to do things differently, to build where some things are going to be so decimated over the next few years that we'll have an opportunity to build from scratch with our vision of an inclusive world in which we can all belong. And then some places we'll be able to rebuild, right, with a strong foundation that's already there based on the great work that's been done, right, by Pisgah Legal Services for over 40 years, by many of the other organizations and many sectors in our society. So I'm just, yeah, I get a lot of, find a lot of hope and find a lot of silver linings in the moments of dark.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of Pisgah Legal how grateful we are for all you've shared with us today, Marielena, that as we came into this today and are now coming out of this conversation, you've given us resiliency and hope. And I'm going to reflect back on all of what you've shared today as I think and reflect on what comes next. And I think many of us, all of us here today are going to be doing that in different pieces. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ali, who is going to close us out.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yes, thank you both. We're so grateful to you, Marielena, and to you, Jackie, for sharing your insights. And I want to thank everyone who's joining us for being part of this discussion. And again, like other ways to find hope, I take comfort because of everyone on the call. And we filled the Zoom room today with people who are interested and committed to this work. So thank you. And before we wrap up, I want to share a really exciting opportunity to take action right now. So Pisgah Legal today is launching our Justice for All Giving Challenge that will support our immigration program. So thanks to the generosity of Ken Brame and Judy Maddox, Karen Ziff and Rich Wash, Jim Barrett, and an anonymous donor, donations to Pisgah Legal's Justice for All program will be matched dollar for dollar up to $100,000. So you can have double the impact right now while powering Pisgah Legal's immigration work. And so if you're inspired by what you heard today, I invite you to visit pisgahlegal.org/justice-for-all to give. And you can also contact me to learn about other ways to make a donation. Every contribution makes a real difference and is going to have an impact here in Western North Carolina. So thank you all for being part of this effort and for being here today. Together, we can ensure that justice is truly for all. Thank you.